So you've been dieting down and everything's going great. You're losing weight, feeling good, and then boom, all of a sudden it stops. I get it, it's frustrating, and you probably want to know why this happened. After all, you haven't changed anything. Don't worry, in this video I'm not only going to explain why this happens, but also how to know if you're really plateaued or not, and what you can do to break through and start losing fat again. Alright, I want to start with why you see these plateaus. However, I do have timestamps for not only why it happens, but also how to know if you're actually in a plateau or not, as well as what you need to do to break that plateau, so feel free to jump around as you need. Anyway, the reason this happens is because our maintenance calories and our metabolism, they're moving targets. As you lose weight, you have less energy demand, so over time, you're not going to burn as many calories, and not only that, but you also see more metabolic slowdowns, you see hormonal changes, and basically the body becomes more efficient at holding onto the calories you give it. This is kind of a survival instinct, as your body doesn't want you to lose too much weight. And if you think about it, it really makes sense. I mean, if you just did the same thing and just continue to lose weight all the time, you would eventually just starve to death if it were just that simple. So when you do see these plateaus, don't get frustrated or feel like something's wrong. It's a normal part of the process. It's your body doing its job and adapting. We just need to know what to do to start losing fat again. Now, as far as how to know if you've actually plateaued or not, well, first of all, it's not because you didn't lose weight for 1 week. It's also more than a scale, which I'll touch on here in a minute, but as far as using the scale, it's fine to use it. It's not the be all end all, but what I don't recommend doing is a weekly weigh-in like so many people do, because your weight can fluctuate on a daily basis up to several pounds, and it's for many reasons, none of which have anything to do with body fat. It's all water weight. It's all things like hormones and stress and sleep and sodium intake and inflammation from your exercise, if you're sore, how much food is still digesting in your system when you wake up, how many fluids you drink. There's almost an endless amount of reasons for the weight to fluctuate daily. Again, it's not body fat, and that's what we're interested in. So if you're only doing a weekly weigh-in, you may be abnormally high or low that day you weigh in, but you have no other data to compare it to, so you don't really know. So what can happen is you might actually be losing, but because the previous weight, maybe you were a little dehydrated or something like that and had a lower weigh-in, and now the next week, maybe you're kind of bloated, had more sodium, things like that, and now you see a higher weight. It can show that you're the same or even gained weight, but that's not necessarily true. So what I recommend doing is weighing yourself every single day, first thing in the morning, after going to the bathroom, and before eating or drinking anything, as this is the most consistent time of the day. And then what you do is take an average for the week and then compare the weekly average week by week, using that as your actual weight, not paying any attention to those daily numbers. And not only does that help give a more accurate representation of what things look like, but it also helps take some of the mental pressure off that number. And now every time you step on the scale, it's 1/7 of your weight, and the less frequently you weigh yourself, the more pressure you put on that number. There's nothing wrong with weighing yourself. The problem is having an emotional connection to that number. But more than anything, you have to understand that it's not just about weight. You can absolutely continue to lose fat without even seeing that number drop down, especially if you're someone who's relatively new to strength training. Perhaps you're building some muscle. There's a lot of things that happen inside the body, so just because the weight's not going down doesn't mean you're not seeing fat loss. So besides just looking at the scale, make sure you take your pictures, take them from the front, from the side, from the back, and compare them week by week, or even going back a couple weeks, because it takes time for the body to change. And sometimes you can see nice changes happening in your body composition, even though the scale's not moving a whole lot. And then you also want to do things like take measurements, especially around the waist, around the belly button, as that's mostly body fat and it's a better indicator, whereas other areas like your arms and your thighs and your hips have more to do with muscle and fat. Doesn't mean you can't use them, but to me, the big one is waist. And then also pay attention to how clothes are fitting. If they're starting to fit looser, if you're starting to notice changes in the mirror, that means things are happening. So we're just looking for something to be moving anywhere, and it's not going to happen all at the same time. A lot of times you'll see big drops in measurements, the scale won't even move. Sometimes the scale drops, but the measurements don't move. Sometimes the scale and the measurements don't move at all, but you see big changes in the pictures. So look for progress in any of these things, and if you're seeing progress, then you have not plateaued yet, and keep going. And I recommend waiting at least 2 weeks of no changes, possibly 3, just to make sure. Because again, it's not just gonna go straight down, and sometimes the body just needs a little more time. Sometimes we get that whoosh effect, so to speak. And if you make too many changes too frequently, before you know it, you're gonna be down to very low calories and nowhere to go. And then before we get into what changes to make, just make sure first that you're being consistent. A lot of the times, the biggest reason people actually get stuck isn't because their body's adapted to a certain amount of calories. It's because they're not being consistent with the plan. Maybe they're doing great for 5 or 6 days of the week, but then they have one big blowout. Maybe you're doing a lot of eyeballing of portion sizes and not being very accurate with that. So taking a week and just being really diligent with things just to make sure that you actually are stuck so you don't have to drop calories can be a good idea. And the last thing you want to do is drop calories if you're not being consistent to the plan. I mean, there's no point in that. Like, if you're having a hard time sticking to the plan, dropping calories more and eating less is not going to help you stick to the plan better. So focus on being consistent first, and then if things aren't happening, then you can make some changes. All right, so you've been consistent, weight's not moving, your pictures are showing the same, no real changes in measurements. So with the body adapted, what that basically means is now you have to eat less and or move more to create the calorie deficit you're after. So you could reduce your calories at this point, and that would probably get things going, but this is not what I recommend. What I strongly recommend, and I'm telling you, this works almost every single time, is take a diet break first, then come back after and make the adjustment from where you were previously cutting from. And I'm telling you, that gets things moving really well. And what this probably does is, I do believe it has some hormonal and metabolic benefits, so you come back from a little bit better place. But more than anything, whether you want to call it that or not, I swear it's like the body just kind of lets its guard down a little bit. You have a body fat set point and you're already probably below that. Your body doesn't like this. So by giving yourself some more calories, reducing your activity a little bit, your body can kind of like back off this self-defense mechanism. And then when you come back and adjust later, now you're in a better place. And if no other reason too, mentally it can help a lot because you got to enjoy a little bit more food for a while. A lot of times you feel better, you have more energy, you can start hitting the gym harder again. And there's just a lot of benefits to it. Now don't go anywhere, I'm talking about how many calories to increase and some strategies you can take. But in terms of the length of the diet break, I strongly encourage you to take a 2-week break over just a 1-week break. I'm telling you, I just noticed time and time again, the body responds so much better giving it a 2-week break. And we can, yes, look at some research that may support this, like the Matador study that was the 2-week on, 2-week off that saw some great results versus the other study that did 3 weeks on and 1 week off, which didn't have metabolic benefits. But in my experience as a coach, this is a strategy I use the most, and I've just noticed that people respond very well when you take 2 weeks, and sometimes not quite so well with only 1 week. Now the question may be, when you take a diet break, usually what you hear is, will you go back to your maintenance calories? But you're already at maintenance calories. You've plateaued, your body's adjusted to this, it's your new maintenance. So if I eat more calories, isn't that going to put me in a surplus and now I'm going to gain weight? I don't want to undo my progress, and you get this fear of undoing things and setting yourself back. But I'm telling you, this does not happen. The body is very complex and it's very dynamic. And I think what usually happens is you get those extra calories, you reduce your activity a little bit, now you start recovering a little bit better, you see this kind of upregulation in hormones and metabolism, and most of the time people don't even gain, and even if you do, it's a small amount, and that's probably more related to things like increased glycogen and water weight and not actual body fat. So don't look at this as a setback. I'm telling you, it's an integral part to a lot of people's fat loss success, especially if you've been stuck on low calories. That being said, because you are stuck, we don't want to make a huge increase. So what I recommend is bringing your calories up by around maybe 200 to 300 calories, preferably mostly through carbs, but it's not the end of the world if it's not mostly carbs, but it doesn't have to be, especially if you really enjoy a lot more fat, as you're still going to get some benefits. It just seems like, based on the research we have, that the body responds better for refeeds and diet breaks through carbs. But even if no other reason, if you get the mental benefit, we can't underrate that. So you'll eat those higher calories daily. Don't get too stressed out about being exactly the same each day. Take an average for the week, but try to avoid wild ups and downs with it. And then you'll also want to reduce your cardio some, again, to give your body a reason to back off. I do recommend, depending on how much cardio you're doing, to drop your cardio by around 30 to 50%. If you're only doing a small amount of cardio, then 50% is fine. If you're doing a large amount, like several hours, then maybe more around that 30%. And then after the 2 weeks is up, first of all, if you happen to lose during this time, which is not as abnormal as you may think, then I recommend keep going with those higher calories and lower cardio until you do maintain on that weight, and then you can come back and adjust. But if you haven't been losing, then you go ahead and you come back to your previous calories that you were dieting on, that you were stuck on, and now you're going to make a reduction from that, maybe add in a little bit more activity, and that should get things going. How much less? Around 5 to 10% less. Everyone's a little bit different. Knowing yourself and how your body responds is important here. Some people can just make tiny adjustments and get things moving. Other people need larger adjustments. It depends on how adaptive your metabolism is. And then maybe pick up 30 to 60 minutes of cardio, maybe an extra, 10, 15 minutes of walking, depending on what you're doing, just to help get things moving. But make sure you're not reducing your calories from protein. Keep that protein up. And actually, if you haven't been eating closer to around 1 gram per pound, increasing your protein while dropping calories could be extremely helpful, as protein is one of the most helpful things you can do for your body composition, and it has such a high thermic effect of food. It also helps you feel full and helps you retain your lean body mass as well. Now, if you do these things and you're still not seeing progress, maybe you're making some common mistakes that I see, and I do have this video up top of some common diet mistakes you want to make sure you avoid so you can get the results you're after. So make sure you check that video out next. Otherwise, I think you'll like this bottom video instead, and I'll see you in one of those other videos.